Minister, we have an entrenched housing crisis where students and families have felt this extremely severely. Can you detail your plans to increase the supply of affordable on-campus accommodation?
Conway-Walsh, I am very conscious of the challenges faced by students in relation to student accommodation, and my department, along with the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, are working closely together on these issues. And I think it is important we work closely on these issues. Fundamentally, everyone in this House will know the underlying issue is one of supply, and we need to increase supply of all types of accommodation, including student accommodation. That's why we launched Housing for All, led by my colleague, the Minister for Housing, which sets out a series of actions which will be delivered to address the housing crisis, backed by what genuinely can only be described in terms of scale as a transformative budget of €20 billion. In their ambition to deliver student accommodation, I do acknowledge that the third level sector is facing the same issues which are affecting construction developments globally, including disrupted supply chains and other constraints. Very significant progress is being made in government's overall housing policy, with both housing completions and commencements now showing significant acceleration, thankfully, and our construction workforce back to pre-pandemic levels. Notwithstanding these trends, construction costs and other constraints are acting as a deterrent to institutions in proceeding with new developments. My department and the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage are now considering whether there are options that are open to us to support increased supply with affordable rent levels. With this in mind, I'm working with my officials to consider immediate options and those initiatives which can be achieved in the more medium term. In relation to the immediate, I have now written to all universities, all technological universities and all institutes of technology and asked them to identify any potential local solutions which could contribute to increased supply ahead of the next academic year. This may involve the repurposing of existing buildings. This is an important and a real sincere offer. We saw in Limerick there was an ability to identify a local solution, some facility that could be adapted there, funding provided through the council, I believe, and that being ready for September. I'd like to see if there's other examples of that, and there's an open offer to all HEIs in relation to that. More broadly, in terms of that medium-term strategic change that needs to happen, we are working, as I say, with the Department of Housing to examine how student accommodation can be incorporated into other developments aimed at boosting land supply, including the Land Development Agency's plans in Limerick, again as an example. In my view, student accommodation should form part of the overall residential mix, and perhaps I'll update you further in a moment.
Minister, I do welcome that, in particular in working with the local authorities to be able to identify for the higher education institutes to identify possible locations for student accommodation and buildings that can be converted. And indeed, as late as last week, I discussed it with our own Atlantic. It takes me a while to get used to the Atlantic University, Technological University. And by the way, I do want to congratulate Orla Flynn. I think she will do an excellent job there, and I know you and I will work with her to ensure that the Atlantic University is successful. So I do think that that's one tangible way that certainly can work. But also, you've stated to me in previous responses that you had no plans to bring forward a new strategy for student accommodation, because the strategy covered 2017 to 2024. And I really do think that that strategy has been a failure, Minister.
I join with you in congratulating Dr. Orla Flynn. I think she'll be an excellent president. I wish her luck and look forward to the ATU coming into being shortly. I know, for example, you've hit the nail on the head. They are one of the institutions already saying, what can we do locally? And what I'm saying is, for the first time here, we're making a shift in policy here and having an open door policy for any local solution or idea that can come forward, particularly with immediate solutions for September. More broadly, though, we do need to, and I've admitted this, we do need to change policy when it comes to student accommodation. We don't need better speaking points to explain it. We need to change the policy. And that's why in meeting with Minister O'Brien, I'm looking at things like the Land Development Agency as they develop across the country. Can student accommodation be a part of that? We're looking at things around the cost rental model. Is there room in relation to that? What do we need to do in terms of, is there grant aid options to make it sustainable for the colleges to build? And I will be, the bit I wanted to tell you this evening, I will be updating the Housing Cabinet Committee at the beginning of April in terms of options in that regard.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Because it's the reliance on the private sector purpose-built student accommodation, it has failed to deliver any affordable student accommodation. If we look, for instance, at Mayo, the problem there is obviously we're concerned about that the lack of accommodation will constrain the possibilities and the opportunities for the Atlantic University, because we only had 24 properties to rent last week in Mayo, and you find students are competing with families, and that should not be the case. We should have purpose-built on-campus accommodation for students. for students. And obviously, Minister, it cannot be separated from the underfunding of the higher education, because even the on-campus accommodation was turned into a source of revenue for colleges to replace the public funding removed under austerity. And it's not the fault of the individual institutions that these decisions were really made at a government level. On-campus accommodation charging near the market value because it's needed to cover costs, and you find that with the different institutes. So they try to attract more wealthier, lucrative students to be able to bring in more revenue for the institutes. Thank you. Minister.
I probably don't have time to engage on the Deputy's last point, but let me just give some statistics, because whilst I accept there needs to be new policy initiatives, there need to be new policy levers, and I've outlined some of them, it is important to say that since 2016 we have seen 12,149 purpose-built student beds being built. Work is underway on site in an additional 3,128, and planning permission has been obtained for a further 10,493. In addition to that, a further 1,028 have been applied for planning permission, just to put those figures on the record of the House. In addition, there was, and this will relate to the matter about the technological university, institutes of technology and technological universities had a lack of clarity as to whether they could borrow to build student accommodation. That's now being clarified. They now can, and we've put into the mix immediate local solutions. The piece here we're trying to rectify is the affordability piece, and that's what student unions say to me as well. It's not just about the numbers being built, which I've cited. It has to be to try and find that affordability piece. We have changed the law. We discussed this earlier in relation to some of the difficulties for students in terms of upfront costs regarding student accommodation, and I accept we need to do more, and I'll bring proposals to Cabinet Committee in April.
No, that